Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real EFL Preview Show, where we look ahead to some tantalising fixtures on the EFL calendar. Before we get started, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you enjoy it, why not share it on your socials as well? Get your friends, tell your friends, and get everybody involved. This week, we've got a great lineup of matches to discuss. In the Championship, we're looking at Derby and Portsmouth, two teams who are beginning to tumble towards the bottom of the table. We've got Peterborough and Crawley at the beginning of the season. It looked like a home banker, but trouble is brewing at London Road. We're here to discuss that. And finally, Chesterfield and Carlisle, the Football League's bottom team. Will they be a Football League team next season? Joining me this week, as ever, is your expert pundit. I am merely the pretty face. Kyle is the expert pundit. He's a rising star of football media. How are you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm back at home at the moment, as you can see the Christmas tree just in the background there. So it's nice to be back for Christmas and plenty of football as always. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the coming weeks.
So you are going to one of the games that we're discussing this weekend, I believe?
Yes, I'm at Derby on Friday night. I've watched Derby a few times this season, including on Tuesday against Burnley. So I'm hoping that I have a decent enough input for Derby fans to listen to today.
Smashing. Well, before we get onto the games, we always take one news story from the week to discuss. And there's only one news story that we could possibly discuss this week, which is Neil Harris stepping aside at Millwall. Now, Neil Harris, in my opinion, was doing a fantastic job at Millwall. He had failed upwards twice, by the way, leaving Gillingham, doing not a great job there, going to Cambridge, didn't really turn them around, then found himself in the Championship. He literally failed from League Two into the Championship. Done really well at Millwall, kind of put them on the cusp maybe of a playoff race. And then last weekend, it all went wrong. Because if there's any set of football supporters that you do not label as thickos, it's got to be Millwall. And if there's anybody that can't label football supporters as thickos, it's got to be the manager of the team whose supporters he's criticising. A couple of days later, Neil Harris is gone. I mean, was this a surprise to you, Kyle?
Given the comments that you've just referred to, probably not in some respects, but I'd actually seen the comments up until when he'd resigned. So after reading it, I was like, well, that gives you a bit of a reason why he'd resigned, I guess. So it makes a little more sense. It's really difficult to say, given their form. You said he came in, he'd failed upwards before, but he took a struggling side at the end of towards the end of last season, kept them up. And this season, they had aspirations of the playoffs at points. They had them 4-1-0 wins in a row. They beat Leeds and Burnley at the start of November, and everything looked well, literally a month ago. They've had a little bit of a blip. They've drawn a couple. They've lost the last two, Coventry and Sheffield United last night, which Sheffield United in particular, we're looking at one of the best sides, as we pretty much seem to say every week in the EFL. But in some respects, yeah, I'm surprised at sort of the timing, if you take away the comments that he'd said. And to put context on the comments, he was referring to the fact that they were without Jake Cooper, Tanganga, Romanese against Coventry. Just a bit of context for the recent results. Interestingly, whilst I was looking through their games, 12 games in a row, the scoreline has finished 1-1, 0-0 or 1-0. Not since the end of September has a game had more than 2 goals involving Millwall. So they had a very certain style of play and a very certain mantra of limiting the opposition to 1 goal, but only scoring a goal themselves. So it's really interesting now for the next couple of weeks to see what happens and who comes in. I think he's already been he'll have been touted around for other jobs at the moment. You think that there's a couple at the moment, teams without managers. So it'll be really interesting to see where it goes. As you say, given the fact he'd fallen upwards into the Championship. Now does he stick around, having got Millwall into a decent enough position? Does he take a job in League One? Who knows? It'll be an interesting couple of weeks for Millwall.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly saved his reputation, I think, with his stint at Millwall, because obviously his time at Cambridge was short-lived. His time at Gillingham was not particularly successful at all. But looking at Millwall, you have to ask what's next for them. I've seen Mark Robbins has been touted there, and that does make you wonder if perhaps the availability of a manager has at all contributed to the managerial change, because Robins is sure to be hot property because he certainly hasn't failed upwards. He's been successful upwards, put Coventry on the edge of the playoffs. Do you think he'd be a good fit for Millwall, or do you think there's another candidate out there?
I really don't know, because it feels like Millwall, you have to have a certain type of manager. Obviously, saying comments like Neil Harris did perhaps shows that he might not have been the perfect man in the end for Millwall. But Mark Robins certainly would have been an interesting one. And I think he's got to have a championship job as his next job, given the success he had with Coventry. I certainly believe he deserves a crack at this level again, at the very least. So yeah, there is that kind of thinking. I don't know whether it was that or the fact, as I said, with the timing of the comments he made, it might have just fitted well. It's his last game on Saturday, Neil Harris. I think they have Middlesbrough, which is another tough game. So hopefully he can go out on a win with a nice result. But it gives the Millwall board something to look at now to see who is available. And if it is sparked by Mark Robins, then you would kind of be expecting some consultation before. I don't know, because at the end of the day, Neil Harris has resigned, so he's not been pushed out. So it's interesting to see where they go from here and what happens next, and if there is any sort of fallout from what's happened recently.
Of course, we could be left with a really unique situation where the manager of the month has actually left the club by the time he is awarded the Manager of the Month award, because today he has been nominated for the Championship Manager of the Month award, which is just absolutely bizarre. We'll move on now in the Championship to two teams who won't have found nominations for the Manager of the Month award coming to their men in the dugout. We're going to Derby County versus Portsmouth. Now, there's quite a nice little anomaly here. Derby County are 17th in the Championship with 21 points, and Portsmouth are 21st in the Championship with 17 points. So 4 points separate them, 4 places separate them. Two teams that are probably struggling, two teams that were in League One last season and who probably you expected to be just above the relegation zone trying to consolidate. Let's start with Derby, because there's quite a bit of pressure on Paul Warne, I think, from supporters. There was last season at periods, and he ended up putting them second and straight back into the Championship. But what have you made of that pressure on Paul Warne?
Yeah, so you referenced first off last season. I remember, I think they lost to Shrewsbury in mid-October, and I personally thought at that point there was a really, really toxic relationship from the fans after the game. There was a lot of chants about his football, which there's always surrounding Paul Warne and his style of play. I think the best way I can possibly describe this season is that they tend to bring better sides down to their level, which is exactly, in some respects, what they did on Tuesday night against Burnley. They battled really well. The pressure is really difficult to talk about, because at the start of the season, a lot of Derby fans would have said, stay up, that is all we can expect from this season. And they started quite well. And then the expectation changes a little bit, and then they've gone on a really, I don't want to say a really bad run, but they've had a difficult November. Some of the results, and you can't just put it purely down to the manager. I saw the games against Swansea and Sheffield Wednesday, and they went 2-0 down against Swansea after 14 minutes. That felt a real point of no return, like the game against Shrewsbury last season. But they responded really well. Swansea didn't have a shot on target after that. They only had one more effort in the 75 minutes after they went 2-0 up. Derby were dominant, and it was just about putting the ball in the back of the net. And Caden Jackson had a chance, I think it was Caden Jackson, that I do not know how he missed from a couple of yards. He put it over the bar. They had 3 efforts, I believe, cleared off the line. So that you cannot put on Paul Warne. Similarly, with a couple of Sundays ago when they played Sheffield Wednesday, they went 1-0 up, they looked good. And in pretty much every game I've seen them this season, they've looked decent enough. So they're sort of like a mid-table Championship side, but they've just been let down a couple of times. I remember I've seen them against Plymouth when they drew 1-1, deflected free kick. Barry Bannon against when they played Sheffield Wednesday scored a ridiculously good goal, and then they won it late on. There was a lot spoke about after Paul Warne's comments when they played Leeds at the weekend, and then there seemed a real response on Tuesday night. They had the midfield three of Kenzo, Adams, and Liam Thompson, which seemed to work really well. The back three behind, you have Erin Cashin, who's one of the best defenders, I believe, in the Championship. You had Nat Phillips, Curtis Nelson. You brought Joe Ward back in. You had Callum Elder. So, looking at that team, prior to kickoff, I was quietly confident that Derby could get a result, and they did. They really frustrated Burnley. So Paul Warne's in a situation now where he'd faced masses of pressure in the last couple of weeks. They go and get a result against Portsmouth on Friday, then that pressure does start to relieve itself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I can certainly see your point. But on the other hand, of course, Portsmouth have turned a corner a little bit as well. 2 wins and 2 draws in the last 4. Probably a side that, when you look at the stature of the club and some of the players, you would expect them to be staying in the Championship. You'd expect them to be bottom half at the moment while they try and rebuild. But it's been a long journey for Portsmouth down to the lower reaches of League Two, back up. Obviously, the tough years under Kenny Jackett, the almost men. So they're going to be really desperate to pull themselves out of this relegation places. And obviously, as we look at that, sort of 8 points from 12, they're in good form as well. So it's not like Derby are getting relegation fodder coming to Pride Park, is it?
No, this game a couple of weeks ago would have been definitely a game Derby would have targeted on paper at least. But now I do feel it has changed significantly. Portsmouth have been really unlucky in some respects with a couple of postponements. They've had the Blackburn away game, the game against Millwall at home, which haven't helped their preparation in recent weeks. And they have had a bit of a shortage of games, I guess it's fair to say. But you pick up on them 4 results. Yeah, things do seem to have changed at the moment. They beat Preston on the 9th of November. Then they went 3 weeks without a game. There was obviously the international break in there, but they were due to have a couple of games. So drew against Swansea, 2-0 up. Perhaps should have got the 3 points that day. Beat Bristol City last Saturday comfortably. They had 8 shots on target. They were by far the better side. And then against Norwich in midweek, a 0-0 draw. I know Norwich have been struggling a bit with injuries. They've just got players back. But I think it was Kenny McLean who had been given a 4-match suspension. I can't remember off the top of my head which player it was, but they just had a man given a 4-game suspension. I think they were literally told at 3 o'clock that day. Portsmouth also had a goal disallowed that night. So, yeah, you're looking at a side at the moment that seems to have turned a bit of a corner. And, yeah, early in the season, there was a lot of worry, I think, that they'd just come up. They spent years trying to get back to this level. They were the nearly men of League One. They'd dropped down to League Two. So there was huge expectation in some respects that they would have a campaign that they stayed in the division. And when you start as poor as they did, I think they won 1 game in the first 14 odd, something like that. And then they have seemingly started to pick up results. So again, that's why it feels like a 6 points, but it feels like a really big game for both. For Derby to back up a really good result, a really good point in midweek and a really good performance, but also for Portsmouth to turn a good draw against Norwich into a really good week by getting a result against Derby.
So are these two in your mind? Are they both looking at steering away from relegation, irrespective of what happens? Do you have fears for either of these two sides going forward over the Christmas period?
It's difficult to say because you look at sort of the teams who are below them at the moment. We don't know how long Wayne Rooney's got with Plymouth. Hull have just got Ruben Sellers in, so you might see an upturn in their form. And there's a lot of clubs that are in that sort of bottom period of the table at the moment. So December looked like a really tough month for Derby. They had Leeds twice. They've got to play Leeds once more at the end of the month. They have West Brom on Boxing Day. That's why this game in particular looked a really big one. They've got Luton, I believe, next Friday, again on Sky. Portsmouth have just pulled themselves out of the relegation zone. And as I say, on the back of this sort of upturning form, they've got to feel confident of getting something. And then hopefully for them building from that and going into January looking in a much better position. And when the Championship is so contested, some of the results, going back to Derby, that Derby have had, the games they perhaps should have won. They could have been looking at a situation sort of where Sheffield Wednesday were just before they lost in midweek, when they were sort of thinking, let's look upwards and towards the playoffs. So it is, you are only a couple of results away from moving towards the top end of the sort of your mid-table pack of teams. But then again, you lose a couple of games. I think Derby a couple of weeks ago were like proper in mid-table, if you like, but they were only a couple of points above the relegation zone. So it is. We always talk about how tight the Championship is, and that's why for every club, December is so big at the moment, because there are so many games to get points, and then who knows? At the end of December, you could be talking about two completely different sides.
Now, when we talk about a couple of points separating a large group of teams, that's really applicable to our next game and to the League One. It's getting really tight down at the bottom of League One. And one team that you would not expect to be there were one of the teams that were in the playoff mix the last 2 or 3 seasons, Peterborough United, who would have hoped to have been in the Championship at the expense of Derby or Portsmouth this season, but they're not. They're deep in the brown stuff. And it gives me great pleasure to say that, because as a Lincoln City fan, there's very little that pleases me more than to see Peterborough United struggling. And if Peterborough United fans are watching this, I don't care. Haters going to hate. So Peterborough United at the moment are 15th in League One with 21 points. And they're at home this weekend against Crawley. They're 21st with 19 points. That's 7 places. 2 points. It really is tight down at the bottom there. Now, very few people would have had this game as anything other than a home win going into this season. Peterborough laden with stars, albeit with a large squad churn, but still signing the likes of Rio Adebisi, keeping hold of Kwame Poku. They look like they were going to be promotion contenders. Crawley, again, kind of huge squad turn, but bringing in, with the greatest of respect, players that probably weren't expected to be League One quality, and yet here they are competing and looking half decent under Rob Elliott. Kyle, let's start with Peterborough because, as I say, it gives me great pleasure. Peterborough, they're 10 points off the playoffs now. And obviously, they're only 2 clear of the bottom 4, of which Crawley are the final bottom 4. What are their general aspirations for the season? Are they still playoff contenders, or is that boat already sailed?
Well, I spoke about a turning point in our last game. This really feels like it has to be a turning point for Peterborough. They have to go and get a result. It is as simple as that on Saturday. It feels massive. 3 losses in a row coming into this game. All right, the game against Reading, you look at where they've come from. You can kind of not expect that, but it's not a huge shock result. Losing 1-0 against Burton, that was when you really felt for them. You really felt they might be struggling. Similarly, Northampton on Monday night, local derby. So it does. This game feels absolutely huge. I don't know where Peterborough got. I genuinely don't this season. As we say, we look at all the attacking talent. Just even a couple of the stats. You look at, they've scored 33 goals this season. That's the second most in the division behind Wycombe, who are top of the league. They've conceded 32, second most in the division behind Shrewsbury, who are bottom of the league. We know what you get from Peterborough in terms of attacking football, always seeming to score, and their squad's filled with attacking players. When they get going, they're a joy to watch. They have obviously lost quality in their squad, and perhaps you may have tipped them to struggle a bit more at the start of the season, but not in a position where they're only a couple of points above the relegation zone. That is not what you expected at all. So this does. I don't want to keep emphasising how big this game is, but it is huge for both, and Peterborough simply have to get a result.
Now, you talk there about their great attacking players. One of the strongest players in all of the Football League has been Kwame Poku. Certainly from a fantasy league perspective, he's been almost a banker. This week, the news emerges, it comes out that he's been ruled out for 3 months. I mean, that really is taking away their talisman at a time when they needed him more than anything. How big a blow is it to Peterborough? I mean, is it possible to put into words?
No, it's absolutely huge. And just to start, I want to look at the rest of the players in the squad, because he scored 10, which means they've still scored 23 goals without him. So you've got the likes of Malik Mothersfield, 6 goals, 3 assists. I think he's joint 10th in both goals and assists. You've got Ricky J. Jones, who scored 5, assisted 2. Joe Randall and Emmanuel Fernandez have both scored 4. So there's goals throughout their squad. So it's not as simple as going, you lose Kwame Poku, you don't score goals. But it's the fact that he's got 10 and he's got 5 assists in 17 League One games. He's the second top goal scorer in the league. He's the second highest assister. So it's huge. The only sort of positive I can take in terms of Peterborough from this is that there was a lot of talk of him getting a big move in January, which on the back of 3 months out means it's pretty unlikely, and they might get him for the run-in. Now, how that run-in looks could be anyone's guess at the moment. It could be looking at staying in the division, or it could be looking at going on a late playoff charge. If they can keep themselves, I think it feels weird saying above water, because this is not what you expect from a Peterborough side. But if they can keep themselves in mid-table and within a reasonable shot, you can perhaps look at sides like, I don't want to speak about Lincoln every week, but like Lincoln did last season, if you had a player like Kwame Poku coming back in February, March time, which is what is expected at the moment, then it could be absolutely instrumental for the end of the season. But at the same point, you can't say anything other that you really feel they're going to struggle. And January is big in terms of do they feel they've got enough to get them to when he's back fit, or do they go and try and strengthen them again? It is really difficult to tell at the moment, and it does feel in a way season defining. So it will be really interesting to see what sort of business Peterborough do in January.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, there's another team taking part in this game as well, which is Crawley, and it's only fair we mention them. Now, I've seen Crawley once this season, but we played them twice. They scored 6 goals against Lincoln, conceded 4. Yeah, they're leaky at one end, but they can score at the other. There has been a definite upturn under Rob Elliott. I think he's made them more solid. He's made them a little bit more direct. Can they take spirit from recent results? Feel confident of getting anything at all at London Road this weekend?
I think they can take confidence from both sides, recent results, if you look at the drop off in Peterborough. But also, we do, as you say, there is another team to speak about here. And Crawley have had a real sort of upturn in a way that they've won the past two teams that, like Peterborough, I don't want to keep banging on about Peterborough, but Charlton and Rotherham were 2 sides that many people tipped to be towards the top end of League One and have been nowhere near. And I saw Charlton last week and they were a very poor outfit. But they're unbeaten in 5, as I say, them couple of wins. Their draws against Bristol Rovers and Burton away. 2 relatively decent points for a struggling side, I guess. And then drawing against Huddersfield at home, which is a big result. You've got Huddersfield side that are in the playoffs. So the last league loss was back in October against Northampton. So, yeah, you've got to look at this game from both perspectives and think that Crawley might look at this also and go, well, we're playing a side really low on confidence. We've lost the main man. Why can't we go and get something this weekend? And as I say, I want to point to them a couple of other games against Charlton and Rotherham. They've clearly proven to beat sides who many felt had good quality in the squad and still perhaps do. And Peterborough are the same. So there's absolutely no reason at all that Crawley can't go and get a result. It just really depends on what Peterborough side turn up and how Crawley deal with what they would expect from Peterborough usually. Crawley are well rested as well. The game against Stevenage last weekend was postponed, so there is that element to it as well. So it's a really interesting game, and I genuinely could not call this even if you asked me. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what this brings at 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. But I could not give you a score prediction at the moment.
Well, in that case, Kyle, I won't ask you. I'll move briefly on to our final game of the show. And this is a really interesting one because actually we're dealing with 5 teams who are looking down the table. And finally, one team in the final game that we've picked is going to be looking up the table. So it's Carlisle United, bottom of the Football League, 24th, 14 points so far this season, 2 adrift of safety. And they're playing host to Chesterfield, who will have promotion aspirations after coming out of the National League. They're 8, 28 points. They're certainly going to be looking up and wanting to go through the divisions like teams like Wrexham and Bristol Rovers and Lincoln have in previous seasons. But let's actually start with Carlisle United because they obviously changed their manager early in the season. They sit bottom of League 2, but they've picked up good points against Crewe and Doncaster, 2 promotion chasing sides recently. Is that a sign of a corner turned?
Yeah, and that's really where I want to start because you look at Chesterfield, as you say, they have aspirations, and it does match the recent run of teams that they've played, as you say. And it's more important, I guess, to look in detail at the games against Doncaster and Crewe. So they had the same shots on target against Doncaster. They both had 3 shots on target. Against Crewe, they led from the from the second minute to the 82nd when they conceded a penalty. And again, the stats were very, very similar between both sides. So you don't look at them 2 games and go, oh, well, Carlisle just turned up and simply shut up shop for the whole game. Particularly against Crewe, they led for 80 minutes. That's a significant amount of time to be ahead in a game. And they only conceded a penalty. And that penalty was also similar to their game against Bromley when 54 minutes in, they conceded a penalty. And they were dominant that day, 23 shots to 9. They had 5 on target, which perhaps shows that having plenty of efforts doesn't guarantee actually working the keeper. And they needed an equaliser in the 92nd minute to get a point from that game. But yeah, we are looking at a side that have seemingly turned their fortunes around a bit. They only had 1 loss in November in all competitions, coming against Wigan in the FA Cup. So we are expecting a Carlisle side to turn up that are well rested as well. They didn't have a game last weekend. It was called off. They also had their game against Crewe was meant to be midweek, but both sides were at the FA Cup, so they changed it to the Saturday before. So they are 2 weeks without a game of any description, which seems really rare because in that time a lot of teams have had 3 games to play, which is exactly like Chesterfield have. So you've got to look on both sides of that perspective, that they've picked up decent points at the moment. They perhaps would have wanted this game to come a bit quicker to carry on that little bit of momentum, but they've also had time to rest and plenty of time to look ahead to this game. So they will be expecting to go out all guns blazing on Saturday.
So we'll come to Chesterfield now. They're 8th in the division, 28 points. They're certainly hoping to be involved in the playoff mix at the end of the campaign. But they are running a little bit hot and cold. They beat Tranmere 3-0, but lost 3-0 to MK Dons. Really contrasting results. What do you make of Chesterfield and their promotion aspirations?
I think first off, you've just got to look at a side that have just come out of the National League, and we always speak about how small the gap is between the top of the National League and sort of the bottom end of League Two, and it is really that tight. So, although Chesterfield are sat a couple of points outside the playoffs, any sort of season where they were in the promotion mix would have been a good season. You look at Notts County last year and how they started, and then they massively dropped off. I don't see the same issues with Chesterfield, but consistency does seem to be a huge issue. In the last 4, they've gone win, loss, win, loss. So you can see that sort of pattern starting to emerge. The game against MK Dons feels really significant in terms of the result because they're now 2 points behind MK Dons. MK Dons also have 2 games in hand on them. That game does feel a little bit, not of an anomaly, but a little bit difficult to fully read into the full picture. They went 1-0 down after 15 seconds. Really well worked goal. They were down to 10 men after 25 minutes. There were 2 yellows in that. And MK sort of seemed to dominate, but they only had 12 shots. They had 9 on target, which, you can read in. They won 3-0. But then Chesterfield responded really, really well in midweek. So they beat Tranmere 3-0. They had 20 shots, 8 on target, which the 8 on target was more than Tranmere managed as a whole. So we are expecting, looking at the table, perhaps a Chesterfield win. But given both sides' recent results, you don't know what you're going to expect. You've also got a Chesterfield side that have won 2 games against League One sides in the EFL Trophy. They beat Lincoln earlier in the season and knocked Wigan out in midweek. And as I contrast to Carlisle, Chesterfield have had 3 games in the time that Carlisle have had none. So there's always benefits on both sides of the coin. But Chesterfield are well. They've got minutes in the players' legs, so you expect them to come here and again be fit, be fresh, be ready from the start with all the games behind them. So it's really difficult to call this one as well. And that's why I kind of chose all 3 of these games, because they feel like really, really tough games. Despite how it may look in a divisional sense, this feels as close as any of the other games this weekend.
Well, as we're nearing the end of the show, we do have a couple of minutes left. And as you've underlined how difficult all these games are going to be to call, I'm going to ask you to call all of these games. But I'm not going to ask you to do it alone. I'm going to do it myself as well. And I will go first. I don't mind putting my neck on the chopping block. You're the expert. I am merely the presenter. So if we look at Derby County and Portsmouth, I think that is going to be a 1-1 draw.
And that is exactly what I was going to go with before you said it, so I'll stick and say a 1-1 draw.
See, I'm offering you a cloak of protection with these. That's the thing. You can blame me for going first. Peterborough and Crawley. I am going to call this as a Peterborough United win. I think they can pick themselves up. They've got enough quality throughout the squad. I think that will be 2-1 to Peterborough.
And here is where I'm going to go with the difference. I'm going to go a 2-1 Crawley win.
Ooh, that'll be interesting. And finally, Carlisle and Chesterfield. I think this is one of the games where Chesterfield will blow hot, not cold. And I think that they are going to win by 2-0.
I'm going to go 3-1 to Chesterfield.
Brilliant. Well, that was great fun, wasn't it? Thank you very much, Kyle, for your expert input this week. We will be back next week as ever, but please do remember in the meantime to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it. Very soon we'll be having our own real EFL uniforms. We just keep getting more and more professional every week. Maybe one week they'll get a professional presenter who doesn't wear rose-tinted glasses and love Lincoln City quite as much as I do. In the meantime, thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you again very, very soon.